Okay, welcome everyone to our first series in the Hope and Healing from the Lens of Survivors, Part 1, Genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. My name is Acacia Warren and I coordinate the single subject program for the Master of Arts in Teaching and Credential. I would first like to thank Richard Aram, our Dean for the School of Education. He is our fearless leader at this time. These times are strange and interesting and unprecedented with distance, online, virtual learning, however you want to name it. But we thank him for leading us with this effort at this time.
And I'm Susan Tomabergi. I'm the coordinator of the multiple subject program. We would also like to thank Professor Liz Pena, the Associate Dean of Faculty Development and Diversity, for being so supportive of events like this and trying to foster a climate of inclusiveness at the School of Education.
We would also like to thank Ryan Hodkowski, our Director of Communications. He helped with putting the announcement together and helping to spread the word. So we are very appreciative of his help and his support.
And also thank you to Carol Jean Tomaguchi for helping with all the graphics, the design, and helping with the promotion of the event. We feel very supported.
And I thank my colleague Susan for helping to moderate our panel for today. I'd also like to thank our panelists. And so at this time, I'm going to ask our panelists to share their name, share their role or their profession with us. And so we will start with the first panelist. Oh, you're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
There you go. There you go. Thank you again for allowing us to be here with you to share a little bit about ourselves. My name is Yehoyada Mbangukira, and I am affiliated with the Rwandan community as the Secretary General of the Rwandan community in the US. And I live in Northern California, where I work for a pharmaceutical company, Johnson & Johnson division of the infectious diseases. And I am from Rwanda, though I never lived in Rwanda for a long time. And so thank you for having us here. And I'll let my other colleagues introduce themselves before we tell you any more than that. Thank you again for having us here today.
Good evening, everyone. Mugira Mahoro, peace be with you in my mother tongue, Kinyarwanda. My name is Ntwari Kyusa. I'm a business development in a private aviation company based in Fargo, North Dakota. And I'm also affiliated, like my colleague just said, Yehoyada. I'm sit on the same executive committee as him, as the mobilizer commissioner. And I've been living in the US for the past 10 years. And I am also a Rwandan, but I'm classified as a third culture kid because my mom worked for the UN 25 years. So I only lived 3 years in Rwanda. And the rest of my life was in different African countries. And then my high school and middle school in Geneva, Switzerland, and came for higher education in the US 10 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm honored to be here. My name is Jean-Pierre Ndagijimana, and I am from Rwanda. I work for Partnerships for Trauma Recovery, and I'm a visiting global fellow at the University of San Francisco, where I'm also a graduate student. Thank you. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, and then at this time, I'm going to allow each person to dedicate this panel session to someone special in their lives. And so I'll start and then we'll go with Susan and then our first panelist. I'd like to dedicate this session to my friend Emma. She is from Uganda and she is currently living in Uganda, and planning this event it took me back to my days where I used to live in Kenya, and that's where I met her. And so I miss her. Uganda borders Rwanda, and so it just made me think a lot about her. So this is for you, Emma.
I will dedicate tonight's panel to my father. He's 86. And just speaking with Yeho and Kusa last night, just about their experiences, it reminded me a lot of my father. And so I'd like to dedicate this to my dad.
Excellent. Are we also dedicating this to someone as well?
Yes.
So I would like to dedicate this to, I could pick several, but I think I'll do it to the Rwandans living in this country in a new culture as we see the turmoil, the ups and downs that destabilize this great country that we took refuge into. And in a way, it has shaken some of us who come from Rwanda and those areas. So I think this opportunity to speak to educators speaks to the need and also the dedication that you have to instruct your students so that they know something about some of the immigrants that live in this country. So to the Rwandans in this country, I dedicate this moment of learning and sharing.
I'd like to dedicate it tonight to the women of Rwanda that rebuilt the country. And really, it's beautiful because as we speak, even our ambassador sitting in DC is a woman. And I really credit this. Women shape me in the man that stands before you today. So I'll just dedicate it to the women of Rwanda. Thank you.
Wow, the question made my heart starting to pound a little bit. I will want to dedicate this event and the conversation to the collective of the people whose stories are going to be centered today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start with the first question. If you could each please tell us something special about your country, anything that you would like to share, because we are educating the educators today, as many of our audience are educators, and thank you to our participants who are also joining us. So please share something special about your country with us.
Thank you again. Rwanda is a very small country compared to many other countries. So it's actually the size of the state of Maryland. So that will give you a context of 12 million people live in Rwanda, about approximately. And Rwanda is a very loving country, culturally beautiful landscape, hills. They call it a country of 1,000 hills. And Rwanda has the refuge, the habitat for the mountain gorillas. And the Western world was introduced to Rwanda when the movie Gorillas in the Mist. Unfortunately, that's a different story for another day, but that was the setting for that. And Rwanda has a large population of those gorillas. It's a destination for many tourists. And of course, the new country, Rwanda, that it is today after the genocide against the Tutsi 26 years ago, is still a loving country. Rwandans, wherever they are, they call it Rwanda. So we call ourselves being in Rwanda when we're in our communities, and that is emblematic of the country itself. It's a very loving, communal type country. And that's one thing that makes Rwanda a very special country.
So
I'll
I'll
pass
add.
it on to my friend Husa. Go ahead.
So I'll add to my colleague here that we have a saying that Imana yirwa handi igataha Rwanda, which means that God wanders during the day around the globe and at night comes home to Rwanda. How Rwandocentric of us, right? But Rwanda is God's country in our mind. And frankly, even the name Rwanda, I was told once that means ever expanding universe. So to go along with what Yohada just said, I have a lot of family members that used to tell me that them that lived in exile all their lives, when they came home, they were quite disappointed. They're like, this country is quite small actually, because y'all were talking about Rwanda this, Rwanda that, but that's the spirit of Rwandans. In our mind, Rwanda is the whole universe. So there's Rwanda that you know on the African map, but anywhere you go, it is still Rwanda. I would add by saying that we're obviously the land of 1,000 hills, very green, very lush, and we'll always say that anyone that comes to Rwanda usually will definitely consider making it their second home. Thank you. And the last fun fact, we have the highest number of women in parliament, which is your Congress, which is 64%, with 30% locked permanent seats, because we know that when you put women in charge, things move along. Thank you.
Thank you, Kusa. 4 years ago when I came, and I was coming for school and for work, and it's still happening. I will come, and if someone, I don't know the person, but I will just jump to hug the person as long as it is the person who is with someone I know. If I come and meet you in an office or in a walking with someone, with a friend of yours, and I will just hug you. And that is the culture of Rwanda. May not necessarily mean that it is the beauty everywhere in the cultures, but in my culture, that's the beauty of it. The hospitality and the welcoming, it's a very important thing. So the country and the community and the culture of Rwanda is very welcoming. And that hug itself is a symbol of it. So I think that's one of the things that I'm culturally very proud of. That, yeah.
Thank you for sharing those beautiful descriptions of Rwanda. And it's obvious that your heart is still holding it in its space. Can you share a little bit of the history of Rwanda to help us contextualize our understanding? Being in Southern California, I'm not very familiar with the history of Rwanda. And so if you could share a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, Rwanda was a colony of Belgium before they had their independence. However, pre-Belgians taking over, it was actually a German territory. And when Germany lost the Second World War, I believe, it was barred from holding any of that rule over any African countries. So it became a French-speaking country based on the Belgians, who had the Congo and Burundi. And so Rwanda is, as I say, was a small country, and the history had us divided up in different groups, 3 groups in particular. So when this series, Genocide against the Tutsi, as the title, it is because in 1994, there was the worst of atrocities that fell on the country because the previous regimes had perpetuated the 3 group, quote unquote, ethnicities within the country. So there was a concerted effort to eliminate one of the groups, the minority group, the Tutsis, and that has a historical beginnings. So 1994 was not the beginning of the problems, because many years ago, some of us, our parents were exiled in the late 50s, early 60s to neighboring countries and all over the world. So we grew up scattered. And so, and the exile mainly affected the Tutsis, because the majority, the Hutu, were trying to push people out because of whatever reason, however it started then. So one of the things that we hear about a lot is the genocide against the Tutsi of 1994. And the reason we have to call it that is because it was planned and executed to decimate the Tutsi group. However, originally and today, we are rebuilding, the country is being rebuilt based on the original foundations of having one people. We have one culture, one language, and those differentiations do not necessarily have any attribution to how we live. So when you hear, just the title of this discussion, it only picks out that group that was targeted for annihilation. And so we are rebuilding where every one of us is Rwandan, period, without any extra nomenclature added to that. So the history of Rwanda is a tapestry of many things that happened, because we can go back as far as when they had kingdoms, well-organized agriculture, education in their own way, that everything was good. When the colonial powers came in, they did that division for whatever reason they did that, and they created the animosity that they left behind when Rwanda became a colony. So that is just kind of a piece of that. It can be a long history, but I'll let my colleagues also add to that, so that you can get a 360 understanding of what it is Rwanda went through. Thank you. Tusa, on to you.
Thank you, Yada. I would add because I know people enjoy dates. We have a legend that says that our kingdom was, so Rwanda, that we all call Rwanda, started in 1100, when we believe that our king ascended from the sky. So again, legends, right? And from there, the Rwanda we call today, Gasabo, which was the initial hill from what Rwanda expanded. Once again, remember, ever expanding universe. So from there, that initial king had 3 or different sons, and that from where we got to know those tribes that people call it. But the interesting thing, because Yeho really covered a good chunk, is that after the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994, there was a cohort of French-speaking African writers that came to Rwanda just to learn about what happened in this country. And obviously they came from different African countries where there's tribes and ethnicities. And when they came to Rwanda, they were like, actually, if there's a country where there's no tribes, if there is a country where there's no ethnicities, it is Rwanda. Because they were expecting maybe that there would be a Tutsi language, a Twa language, a Hutu language, a Hutu dance, a Tutsi, but they realized these are one people, one God, one culture. So again, it was interesting when we got occupied first by the Germans and then occupied by the Belgians. I don't want to be the devil's advocate, but I can understand that they came with the lens of other African countries. They're like, now I'm pretty sure they're like another African country. They have different tribes, different ethnicities. Whereas Rwanda, really, we all have allegiance to one common ancestor, which is Kanyarwanda, and Kanyarwanda being the son of Gihanga, that king I told you that descended from the sky. So once again, that's one thing where throughout my life living outside of Rwanda, many times people have asked me, so what are you? And I've always said, I'm Rwandan. Because what you're asking me is, were your parents farmers, cattle herders, or hunters? And right now, my parents studied, got the degrees, they're none of these. So us, we're just Rwandans. And it's not just necessarily in a political correctness of answering. It's actually an ancestral and being really faithful to our original ancient Rwanda common history of one common ancestor, one religion, one God. The last thing I really wanted to say is, when it comes to contextualizing, it is easy to once again espouse either even our neighboring countries, what they've done and what they've been through, but in a very exceptional approach. Rwanda is truly, again, an exceptional country and a very different country from the other 53 African countries you can think of. So yeah, thank you. I'll let it off to Jean-Pierre. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you both for helping to contextualize the historical context of the nation. And as my colleagues already shared, I would probably put in a kind of like four period, which has the before colonialism, the before colonialism with Rwandans at the time who history showed us that there was unity among Rwandans. Not to mean that there was no war, but the wars were not within Rwandans, but the idea to expand the nation, which Kyusa mentioned about even the name, the etiology of the word, of the name Rwanda. So, but then after Rwandans lose the independence, and then the role of colonialism. And when talking about colonialism, you have to talk about Germany, Belgium, and the role also the role of the church, and everything that was done to divide, to conquer and rule, and the tension, the ethnic tension that was created, or the creation of ethnic, and the creating the division between the people who were families, actually. And so with that colonialism, which very tied also to the process that led to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. And then after that, after the genocide, I would also say that period of also post-genocide, which is a process of rebuilding, of reconstructing, of reuniting people, of kind of rebuilding the country from ashes. The process and the way our country is, I'm proud of where we are now, and we still have a long way to go. But knowing where the story was, remembering my childhood and my personal story and the collective story, I know that we are at a better place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for giving us historical context about Rwanda. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to share their experience or expertise or stories or reactions to the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. So what would you like for the audience to know?
Thank you. The unfortunate circumstances that put Rwanda on the map to be known were the circumstance of 1994. The genocide against the Tutsi, and for some of you may know, genocide is usually, it has like 8 to 10 steps for it to be enacted. A genocide is defined as that objective to get rid of another group of people, whether for ethnicity reasons, religion, or whatever else that might be. And in the context of Rwanda, it was over time, as Jean-Pierre just said about the colonial and the genocide season, the governments that took over after the colonial power had been with the colonial powers, the majority rule, the concept of majority rule was instilled in them. And so the Hutu government was installed in the early 60s, the 62 in particular. That's when the independence of Rwanda was. But over time, there was the divisions that delineated to where we had ID cards that designated Tutsi, Hutu, and Twa. So that when you present your ID, they know exactly what group you belong to. Granted, we all spoke the same language, same culture, same foods, same everything was the same. So you cannot quite tell who is who really. And so that over time, in 1990, that's when the exiled Rwandans from the 60s, whose children now are in their 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s even, children and their grandchildren, they had it to whereby they were like, okay, it's time to go home. Many of us were educated in, like I said, I was born and raised in the Congo. My parents left with part of that group that went out of Rwanda in the early 60s. And so people were just tired after living in exile for so long when there is a country that you belong to. And so there was an invasion in 1990, and then there were negotiations where they were trying to figure out how to coexist and forget the past. So from 1990 to 1994, there were negotiations chaired by various African nations to see if they can repatriate these Rwandans living in Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, the Congo, and other places. So during those years from 90 to 94, that is when in 94, the plans to just get rid of these guys who are trying to come back in to claim part of this country was put into action. And the records say over 800, if not 1 million people died in that 100 days. And so the introduction to Rwanda came through the media with this macabre story. The US and everybody, the US was not able to intervene. No way any other country is able to intervene because they looked at it, they classified it as a civil war, and they left it at that. They had to put on a commission to study, is it a genocide? Is it a civil war? And we can get into that, but it was a genocide. By the time they figured out, they're studying whatever these delineations of what is it really, 1 million people are dead. And so that is when now we have displacement, orphans, widows, maimed, everybody. So there's chaos. And so in 1994, in end of June, early July, that's when the invading Rwandan Patriotic Front army was able to stop what had been going on for 100 days. And so that's now what Jean-Pierre alluded to as the rebuilding of the country. It started in 1994 to today. So I'll let Chusa add to that. But that's the basically what brings us to the genocide, and then why was the genocide? Go ahead, Chusa.
Thank you, Yeho. The one additional thing I wanted to say is just for you to measure the absurdity of what we call, but also how meticulously and scientifically this genocide was prepared, is that often, and I want to bring some colonial terms as well, when we have Westerners analyzing the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, they still diminish it of, oh, very spontaneous, those troubled people grab machetes and start killing each other. Whereas the genocide of the Tutsi in Rwanda was scientifically prepared. And when you hear stories of 59 massacres, the 60s massacres, in the 70s massacres, and then throughout you had pogroms as well. And then 94 was the final solution, as they called it. And when you know that the president that was killed in his plane in 1994, April 6th, on his table by his bed, there was Mein Kampf, so Adolf Hitler's book. So you want to think about people that had prepared things very minutiously, had names of people, knew who to kill, how to kill, and even knew what kind of dissident voices of the Hutu regime, the extremist Hutu regime in power in the 90s, who to kill that could potentially be a voice that would have maybe slowed down, like, hey, this is not correct. This is actually unacceptable. Do not kill your neighbors. So really, that's one thing I always want to invite people to think. It wasn't some kind of, because in a colonial way, African people don't think much, they love blood. No, it was something as meticulously prepared as the Nazi genocide against, for the Holocaust, the Cambodian, the Armenian, Bosnian. I mean, the list could go on. But the other thing I want to share about the absurdity of classifying and using cards, ethnic cards, was that I remember growing up, my mom used to tell me that you could have in the same family, siblings, one could be classified as one group and the other one as the other group, because they said, what's your height? What's the size of your nose? How many cows do you have? And when you think of such questions, I remember being a middle schooler in Switzerland, and my friends obviously bombarding me with a lot of questions. And I would say, hey, if today, because it was always the words, well, that was a minority leading the majority, that was not very democratic. But usually what we said, there was obviously the aristocracy, which was like the 1% in the US. Let's use US terms. That was the 1%. And yes, that 1% was called Tutsi. That was the king and his royal court. But the greater majority was very fluid. The king could appreciate you. You did some heroic act on the battlefield and you became a Tutsi. Or maybe you did something not so good, you became, so the interdependency, we needed farmers, we needed people that had cows, and we needed hunters. But the one thing of the absurdity of having height to measure who's what, having the number of cows to know who's what, and also measuring nose. And I want to invite even some people in the audience. Think about you and your siblings. Do you have the whole same length of nose and the same height? So if you're in Rwanda, by the way, you would have ended up in different groups. Because if you're 6'2", well, guess what? You're this. If you're less fortunate, you didn't drink enough milk, you're 5'1", well, think again. Yet you're from the same mom, same dad. So again, it's for you to really think of the absurdity of how we got classified and how we started creating a sense of majority, minority. So when you have in 62, the new government and the abolition of monarchy, they said, finally, the majority is gonna come to power. Whereas in Rwanda, once again, not only we share the same hills, the same neighborhood, the same everything, we were very fluid. And there was intermarriage for centuries and centuries. I only know you can trace that there was, like in any country, in any region of the globe, clans were fighting. Clans would fight with neighboring countries, because, you know, humans are humans. But never, it's traceable in Rwandan history, starting in 1100, like I said, a group of Hutus attacking Tutsis or a group of Tutsis attacking Twas, because that was someone from your same clan. So that's one thing that is very important. The other thing I'll always invite people as well to know is that as Rwandans, as we've done our best to rebuild the country, I know that I was only 4 years old when it happened. I was outside of Rwanda. But all of us were either directly or indirectly affected. But the one thing that was really interesting is when you think of other countries where maybe after the Holocaust happened or after Milosevic, the Serbian leader, wanted to kill the Yugoslavian Muslim that were Bosnians. Now there's two countries or many, now there's Israel and there's us in Rwanda, because again, we have one country. In the aftermath, guess what? Your neighbor could have been the person who slaughtered half of your family, or the person in front of you would be someone that you saw doing something to another family. So that's also the peculiarity of Rwanda, is that you have until now survivors with, you can still see even scars on their faces, living side by side with the person that slaughtered maybe half of their family. So this to me is also speaks to that core fabric of the Rwandan culture, but as well that sense of creativity and innovation that Rwandan had to do. Because I remember, I mean, I don't remember, I was only 4 years old, but I remember reading and hearing from my elders that there was a thought of, you know what, maybe after the genocide, we should do a Tutsi land and a Hutu land. There's no way they're gonna be able to live together. Like, it's never been seen anywhere else. And we said, no, no, no. We have one Rwanda and we're gonna, by God, do it. And we did it. But we're still humans. It is still an ongoing process. And it is something that I think sometimes, even as a Rwandan, sometimes I have to pause and realize, wow, is this still a project, that Rwandan project, possible to really put people side by side? And I'm proud today, 26 years after the genocide against the Tutsi, to tell you that, yes, it's done. And we always end by saying, if you don't believe my words, because I'm biased and I'm very proud of being Rwandan, come and see it yourself. Thank you.
Thank you both. My positionality in this, with the question you asked with expertise, my positionality kind of puts me in two things that are intertwined, given that I have my own experiences in the things I want to say that I have expertise in. But the expertise that I probably goes beyond what I learned from school, probably most importantly, what I learned from the lived experiences, so the lived knowledge. So when I share about that expertise in this, think about that too, the experiential knowledge. I was a born refugee, and my parents, probably same story with what Yeho shared. Parents being some communities like being pushed, like in 1959, and in those period when parents were pushed away and they had to leave. And I was born in the Congo, and at the time that genocide was happening in Rwanda, you can imagine if the same people doing the genocide, when they had to escape and go to the Eastern Congo, when they lost the battle, and that's where we were, and all the anger and the frustrations and everything, the tools they had to kill and the weapons, then it was our time, those of us who were in the Eastern Congo. That is the experiences of what happened during that time is a lot. And I've been also in the aftermath, returning back to Rwanda. My role and my work has been around healing, the healing process. I did clinical psychology, public health, and now I'm doing international multicultural education in a way that is trying to understand the healing in the context of Rwanda, or maybe in the context of Eastern Africa, maybe in Africa, kind of looking at what does healing the collective wounds mean, especially that the healing protocols we have, the healing framework we have, the trauma healing, the mental health services, the counseling we have, that we had to receive after the genocide, were not conceptualized with the Rwandans in the minds of theorists. The educators who taught the people who are doing the counseling, who had to do the counseling, did not teach them how to heal that genocide. So what happened when the genocide happened and people had to heal that genocide? Where did that knowledge come from to heal the genocide? Who knew how to heal it? And so what we experienced after the genocide was great people with great intentions who came with wanting to help. And they came with what they knew, what they had. They knew that there is something called the PTSD that had to happen when an event happened, a traumatic event happened, and there is a PTSD that has to come from that. There is a severe depression. There is ABCD disorders classified in DSM or APA classifications of disorders and the treatment protocols. But then what happened, we started to see that people who really need the counseling are not seeking support. What is going on? And they will start to do like psychoeducation, raising awareness, and but people still are not reaching out for support. And what does that mean in a post-genocide context? And what kind of started to realize was that, actually in my work, and was that people they want to see things as something that is just happening in their brain. And in my experiences, other experiences in my profession as a healer in the community, was me going on the internet and in the books and the symptoms, and whether it was on radio or TV or educating in the community in person, I would go and page by page reading, this is what this wisdom person in the US, in Europe said. And the people will be like, yeah, but I'm not going to seek that support. That's not me. So in the process of finding, like, how do people experience like things like these? How do they understand this? Some people would say that it is disorders, and others are like, oh, no. I don't have this. You don't understand me. If you think I have mental disorder, if you think that this reaction is not normal, given what I experienced, you're not understanding my story. You should see this as a normal experience, as a normal reaction to actually an abnormal context, an abnormal event, an abnormal situations. And in my work as well, in my experiences, I've had the chance to work with also Jody Yuri. Dr. Jody Yuri is probably here in the audience, kind of working on, and after we worked with long time conversing, having conversations and around like, how do we learn from what did not go well? How do we meet the people where they are? And Jody has this conversation around when we, after like months discussing and was working, Jody was also working with a colleague, Dr. Mary Doman, around stress. Like, what if we look at that concept of stress? And with that concept of stress, and for me was like, stress, but everyone has stress, but these things are too deep to be called just stress, the stress of after work. And it is not that stress. And then we continue to have those conversations, and sometimes like feeling like, no, that is not going to match. There is something really deeper than that. Or there is someone, because when you say stress, many people will think that it is because I'm busy at work. But not the accumulation of events and traumatic experiences that are not necessarily huge, as it was assumed that for one to experience trauma, you need to have a specific event that happened at a specific time, and kind of started to look at the accumulation of experiences. That sometimes it is not just something that happened on this day and you are okay, but the prolonged accumulation of stress that once to accumulate, something break in our brain and body. And that's kind of brings me to the to that experiences in my work of being the work I had in Rwanda, but also the work I have here. Like I work for, as I introduced myself at the beginning, I work for Partnerships for Trauma Recovery, which is an organization who's working on healing the psychological, psychosocial problems, issues that resulted from human rights violations. And here we are talking about immigrant communities. I work through the organization, through Partnerships for Trauma Recovery, work with the high school students and who are mostly from Africa, who are new students at the school. And where I work at that school and in that community, and when you look at what they do or what the experiences they are sharing, sometimes the worst things that they are sharing with me are not necessarily those deep stories of what happened before they came. It is actually an accumulation. The worst that they share with me in the experiences are the accumulations of the racist experiences they are having being here, of A, B, C, D, things that's kind of one adding to another without what I call gaps of calm. And that without having that gaps of calm, when the stress accumulate with no resources to support, to that person to feel a relief, then that's kind of part of what we are seeing in the communities, not just taking an experience, you said, oh, you experienced this specific. Yes, those are the experiences, but when the communities have strong support, I don't mean that the traumatic events do not mean anything, but when there is resources to support the communities, in a way that they meet the people where they are, not trying to pull them like, okay, no, what do you know? I think Chusa says something about the resilience, the strength, the creativity that was required for Rwanda to start over. What did we learn from that? What are we learning from that to actually rethink and conceptualize what healing means in this collective culture, in this collective community? Because many of the systems, the way we have learned, the theories and the practice are more like, okay, you have a problem, it's one-on-one, come and talk with me. But when you are in a communitarian culture, I've learned that when you took someone away from the community and just you have a standalone one-on-one counseling, you are actually prescribing the same problem. You are bringing more of isolation, and that is what they want to escape. They want to have a community, a sense of belonging. They want to trust again. And so that's kind of in a process of rethinking, of reconceptualizing. It is a process. I don't mean that I already know where we are going or where it is needed, but it is learning from everyday experiences, from every single story we hear. Yeah, that's probably what I could share now with Isabella. Thank you.
Thank you to all three of you for sharing this history. I feel like I have a sense of the past, the present, and the future. And I'm also making connections to other genocides, other internments, other Holocausts, and I'm kind of seeing those similarities there. So my question then is, in order for this to happen, you talked about the ID cards and how people were forced to carry these around. And then Cusa, you talked about how everyone was directly affected, and that it could be in one family, you could have people who are carrying different ID cards. And then Jean-Pierre, you're talking about kind of the healing part of it and what it takes to provide that support for that generational trauma. Even though the kids today may not have experienced it, they're still experiencing the after effects of this. So what was the role? Because it had to have the greater community participation for this atrocity to happen. So what was the role of schooling and education before 1994? And then Jean-Pierre, you can kind of touch on this. What is the role of education now when it was for the healing part of it? And to the audience, if you want to throw questions in the chat, we'll try to get to them at the end also. So what was the role of schooling and education prior to 1994, and what is the role of it present day?
Thank you. Yeah, I want to say superficially, or just giving a bird's eye view of education in relation to this particular situation that culminates in 1994. Many of those that went to school in Rwanda would give instances where a teacher would get up in class and say, all the Tutsis stand up, or all the Hutus stand up. And for whatever reason, there was that targeted separation. So over time, there is this perpetuation of difference, as Chusa touched on, the historical colonization. Somehow it gave these ratios, these powers kind of divided or even denied if you belong to whatever classification they did, because the majority was in power. So when you fast forward to 1994, there is already the dehumanization of the Tutsis, where they are looked at or even called by the word for cockroach, inyenzi. And so the Nyenzi that are in the Tutsis inland in Rwanda have to hear this all the time. And then the Tutsis outside are given the same labels. And so the majority are brainwashed over time to say you must preserve the country so that those cockroaches, those vermin, do not come and take your country away. So academics notwithstanding, they are there, they are moving on like any other country, but there's this injection of difference that seemed to permeate society at the time. And so even with these IDs that are given, people are ostracized because of what group they belong to. So with that, when you flip it after the war, after the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994, when Chusa says we are going back to our beginnings where we are all Rwandan, that is, and they've actually instituted or tried to have this initiative called Ndi Umunyarwanda, I am Rwandan, instilled in everyone, because it is against the laws today to do anything with the ethnicity division as a reason. In other words, it cannot be a motive, it cannot be something that makes you do something against somebody. So the inclusion of being a Rwandan, we are all Rwandans. And so today, the education system has been retooled to allow everyone to participate equally without regard to where you came from. As Chusa said, when you're one family and you have different heights, different sizes of facial features, how do you account for that? What does it really matter? So the education today is one that says we shall not go back to how things were. And so if you had to come to one of our commemorations every April, between April and July, for 100 days, we have the commemoration of the genocide. Our motto is always never again. We do not want to go back to things that caused as much chaos, because they were really, really bad. Something that we started off saying, Rwandans, or the good thing about Rwanda, it's a communal community. One of the successes, unfortunately, the successes of the genocide against the Tutsi was that very thing, that very communal, the communal culture, whereby, I give an example, is if Jean-Pierre is my brother and Chusa, and a killer came looking for our family, they would know we got Yehoyada and we got Jean-Pierre. Where is Chusa? Until they find Chusa, the family is still not decimated. So, and the people who came to do the killing are your neighbors, as he said today. Those neighbors that killed your family neighbors, they're living with their neighbors, the ones they killed. And that was designed in the rebuilding of the country. Too many perpetrators, too many people participated. The court system, the judicial system was not adequate to have those cases. So they created another communal thing that used to be called gachacha, the justice on the grass. There's somebody who wrote a book called Justice on the Grass by Dina Temple Rustin. And basically what it was the guilty party came to his village and confessed to what he or she had done and directed the victim's family where they buried their dead. So that, and this person, once that justice, the community justice system brings him in, he confesses, he helps rebuild the community. That's how they managed to reduce the incarcerations of the guilty. And so that it goes back to the let's build a country as a collective body of Rwandans. And that is the education today. So there's a solidly pro-Rwandan, no more divisions that are being perpetuated today. And that's the education, that's how the institutions are built up to perpetuate, to just rebuild everyone, self-esteem, the culture, and for the common good. I'll pass it on to Chusa.
Thank you, Yehoyada. I wanted to add, when it comes to education, because as you know, it's known that education is a great tool to uplift people. It's a great tool to climb that social ladder. But when you think in Rwanda, after 62, one of the things the government wanted to do is to impose quotas. So they said, okay, if there is, for instance, 15% of Tutsis, 82% of Hutus, and 3% of Twas, when you go into a school, that should be the quotas. There should be 15% of Tutsis accepted, 82% of Hutus accepted, and just 3% of Twas. But the very interesting of this was that now it removed meritocracy. Because if when there was like, we had, after, when you're done with middle school, usually you take like a national exam to make it to the best high schools. Even if you were the best of the best, as soon as you were of that percentile of, nope, we've already had the 15th person of the Tutsi ethnic, you cannot join a school. So one of the stories I read was that some families came together and started building private schools because they're like, we want our kids to keep having access to good education. So we're gonna do private schools. That's number one. The other thing was that when it came to how are we gonna make sure you kill that potential social ladder for Tutsis to keep advancing in pre-genocide 94, they as well were really discouraging people to further their education. So I know I've heard of many stories where as soon as you're done with primary school, so you're done with elementary education, they would say, oh, no, I think you're good to go, you should go teach. So you have a lot, like from people born maybe right around independence or so, a lot of them didn't make it more than elementary education. If you have obviously the means to go to a private school, they would go. But the average Rwandan, which was the majority, if you're a Tutsi, when you're done with elementary studies, there's many cases of them not making it. And hence, a lot of them either went to another country in the neighboring country. And then now you want to think, now you're in a new country. So now they had to like be uprooted and start all over again. So the interesting thing of education is that when you know, we often do parallels with the the Jewish diaspora, when you know that level of excellence, that level of, you've always been on the road, so you know that your education is everything. As much as there was a generation of people that were disadvantaged and pushed to the sideline, those that were fortunate to make it in another country where maybe there was a semblance of meritocracy, usually you know that people did everything to access good education. And then there's a lot of stories of a lot of Rwandans in exile going back to some refugee camps to teach for free. There are other fellow refugees that were still maybe at that elementary level education. So one of the things that is beautiful was that level of solidarity as well, that level of being organized and that sense of community. And anytime you knew someone had a connection, let me make up something. I have a connection to making it to Harvard of Uganda or Harvard of Burundi. I would make sure that my other brothers and sisters are stuck in the refugee camp to connect them. So as much as there was obviously struggle and a hardship of not being able to make it in your own country, a lot of them, as you know, humans are always ingenious in finding ways of thriving. A lot of people got creative. But now when you come back to Rwanda, the interesting thing was even the rewriting of history. Because between 62 and 94, the history taught in Rwandan education was that Tutsis came from Ethiopia, Hutus were the original indigenous people with the Twas. So constantly was, hey, you strangers, why are you here? This is not your country. So you were born knowing that you're not from this country. And like Yohyada said earlier, whenever they would say, who's a Tutsi in class, stand up. And you would see you standing up. It was almost like if right now, as an immigrant in the US, an American teacher would say, who's not American here, stand up. Obviously I would have to stand up. And you can see that sense of, you foreigner, taking advantage of my land. You coming here thinking that you know it all. So that was one of the things that people said that really instilled that sense of not belonging. And by that sense of not belonging, it then gave authority for in 94 or throughout the different programs, like I told you, 59, 63, 72 or 3, I should know that date, 73. And then in 90 as well, when the first time the RPF attacked Rwanda, and then in 94. So all the time when people even were attacked their fellow Tutsis, they weren't attacking a Rwandan, they were attacking a foreign invader that was occupying their territory. So this is really something that was very hard. And now when you think of what we call historical symmetry, there was one time a Rwandan researcher named Bamoriki, who said how the German came in Rwanda in 1894. From 1894, after the Belgians in 1918, at the end of the First World War, from 1894 to 1994, it took them 100 years to rupture the Rwandan unity. So now when you think of that 100 years of disrupting Rwandan unity, and now we're just at 26 years of rebuilding that Rwandan unity, you can see that asymmetry in us doing our best to bring back that sense. But I'm very hopeful that with the education that we're doing right now, the Rwandan government instilling that sense of meritocracy. I remember when I was done in high school, going back to Rwanda for some kind of a civic boot camp, and there was the best of the finest Rwandans selected, and they all had a presidential scholarship to the best schools around the globe, the best universities, excuse me. So again, that instilled a sense of we want the best of the best. We don't care where you're from. We don't care what's your background within Rwanda, obviously. As long as you have the best grades, you're gonna have the best education. So to me, it reinstilled meritocracy, reinstilled a sense of oneness, and really propelled Rwanda to regain again that fully yet lost for 100 years sense of unity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think I would say a few things. In the local language in Rwanda, the words education and poison are almost written in the same way. Uburozi, uburezi. You may even think that if I say poison, you may think I say education, and vice versa. So it's easy to poison students. while thinking you are educating them. I've seen that a lot, and they shared the stories. And I've also observed that in the schools here in the Bay Area, unfortunately. And there's the one proverb in Rwanda that says, "Uwibahetse abayigisha uri mu mugongo." I will ask my colleagues who have better English than mine to help me translating it.
Well, basically, when in Africa, the mothers carry their babies on their backs. So the expression, the proverb is, if the person that is carrying somebody on the back goes to steal, he or she, especially the lady, is teaching the one in the back how to steal. Is that captured, Jean-Pierre?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you so much. Recently, when I was with my students and with my work that I mentioned, when the students say that the most stressful thing for him in the school is that all the time when a student anyone makes like stupid things in a classroom and the teacher is teaching, when they look at the students, they always have to pick that African student. It's you who did that. By default, the student who had to do the stupid things in the class had to be that student, even when everyone could laugh, like, no, it wasn't his student, it's someone else. The students in the classroom are learning that behavior. And that's what I would just want to mention, that those who made the master plan of the genocide, where people were highly educated, they conceptualize what is need to be done, and it is prescribed, is delivered to those who are going to implement it. And the educators, from our experiences looking about the history of Rwanda, is that we have learned the cost of poor education. Education, it's easy to be the center of injustice. And it is easy, or at least if intentionally conceptualized and delivered, it's also possible to deliver and provide humanizing education. You can dehumanize students and they can pay tuition fees, and in 10 years or 15 years, they will be killing each other. Or you can provide humanizing education, learn from the students what can be useful for them, what is useful for them, learn from them as they learn from you. And I think in my experiences as in the healing process, but also as an educator, that is one of the beauty of education, when I try to learn how can I provide the most humanizing education. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for sharing, especially since a lot of our audience members are educators. It's important for them to understand the role of education leading up to, and I mean, in the present, the past, and the future. We're gonna open up time for people to ask questions. And so I wanna make sure we touch on at least a couple more questions. And one of them is speaking to the genocide survivors. So can you share with us how the genocide survivors and their families are doing today?
That's a very good question. Impossible to answer fully, but for the most part, the country, we mentioned it's developing, and things in Rwanda are new, actually. New in the sense of self-determination, a sense of collective duty to do one's part every day. So they are doing well to the extent that when you look at the statistics today, Rwanda is a very well-traveled country. The president and the leadership there have been commended for what they have done, keeping it together after the horrid experience of 1994. People in general are doing well, and Kusa mentioned this presidential scholars that the country has invested in to go study overseas. They have come back to bring back the expertise that they have received from the different universities they've gone to around the world. And so Rwanda has become a magnet for business, small as it is, but it's surrounded by large countries that can provide the sources of income by being the consumers, basically. And so the country in general is doing well. People who are being educated are doing well, so basically everyone is called to build. Those of us who read scripture, the book of Nehemiah is a good example of exiles coming back to build the walls that have been burned down of Jerusalem. And Rwandans were so scattered by not a choice of their own, but now that they have a country, they all came back, not all, but many of them came back with the intent to build communities, build infrastructure, build institutions, build whatever humans, Rwandans need to survive and to prosper. So that would be my main overarching view of how are the survivors. And for us Rwandans, actually the word survivor needs to be understood by not people like me who were outside of Rwanda who are still living, but usually for us, a survivor is someone who is in a house of 5 and 4 are dead, 1 is left. That is a survivor. Jean-Pierre mentioned the trauma and all that. So they have found a way, they're working through that experience because the community infrastructure was broken, decimated, to where the support system that we had was not there. So the concepts of psychology, counseling, and the therapies were taken care of by the village. But this was one of those like nth degree of trauma, way beyond the village that is decimated where they can put it together. So education, to bring in counselors, psychologists, and psychiatrists to manage those traumas has been something that is slowly being absorbed. If Jean-Pierre can speak to that, because previous to that, Rwandans did not know how to air their dirty laundry. They were very communal, but at the same time, self-respecting not to tell war stories. So that has been an educational process that's going on. So overall, the country is supportive and the survivors are doing well. And even those who have come from outside who were traumatized by virtue of being in camps, refugee camps for all their lives, they have found a place they can call home where they can thrive. Kusa, I'll let you continue from there. You're on mute if you hear me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Yohada. One thing I wanted to add, there's a famous psychiatrist. One is no longer. He was a Rwandan psychiatrist, and he always said on how after the genocide against the Tutsi, usually in Rwanda, we say that our departed loved ones, once we put them on the ground, they can finally rest peacefully. But when you think of when the genocide happened, many were thrown in mass graves, many were thrown in rivers. So to us, it was almost like they're never going to get that eternal rest that they well deserved. So that was one thing that already was very hard. The other one is a Rwandan lady based in Germany named Esther Mujawayo, who's a psychiatrist as well. And I remember one thing that was very deep she said one time was that she was a survivor herself, but she said that in Rwanda, we have many greetings where we wish each other things. If I see an elder, that elder will wish me to have parents. If I see a peer, I wish, if regarding the gender, to have a wife or to have a husband. I wish you to have cows. It's all about wishing. But after the genocide, a lot of survivors could not even dare wish each other such things because it would reopen a wound. So that was one of the big things for our culture that was really left like a stain. It was that now the most basic yet so deeply rooted in our culture, greetings, wasn't able. So a lot of times, even when you think of saying hi to someone, some people would just opt for Yes Akuzwe, which is praise be to Jesus, and Ite Kardiose all the time, because at least a lot of us could somewhat rely on, Jesus. Maybe during the genocide wasn't there, but at least now he's maybe back because we have peace. But that was one of the big things I remember that I took, was that to the core of greeting, which is a very deeply thing in Rwanda. Like if an elder sees me, gira ababyeyi, gira umugore, gira inka, amasho, which was very deeply. But now, as a survivor, there was that sense of, I don't want to reopen a wound, or even sometimes, let me not say anything because I don't know who's in front of me. That sense of that trust. When you think of people living in hills, where everyone used to share the most precious things, such as the milk and banana wine. Now it was, how can I share this precious beverage with that neighbor who either killed me or was killed? So again, the Rwandan government had to be very creative. And by the different measures we took, it was very creative. It wasn't always easy on the survivors, because a lot of times I would say Rwanda was rebuilt with the belief that survivors had a deeply Kinyarwanda word said, kuihangana. They had to hold up tight and stay upright. Nimwihangane, like be strong, but we have to keep moving on. Be strong, but we have to, every 10 or 5 years when prisoners would serve their sentences, we would free them. And some survivors were like, are you going to free the person that slaughtered half of my family? But again, the Rwandan government had to say, twihangane, because unlike the US, who seems to have a lot of money to build prisons and to keep people in prisons, Rwanda, we don't have those means. So we knew that we'd rather have people back contributing to the social fabric of Rwanda rather than behind bars and being not as productive as they could be. And so far, we're very proud to say that once again, in that slightly smaller than Maryland territory with 12 million people, very dense. In Rwanda, anytime you're driving anywhere outside of our capital city, in the countryside, there's always someone walking around. So survivors have to live with perpetrators. But most of the times, there's a lot of funds to help survivors. Sometimes there have been instances where perpetrators had, during their sentence, build homes for those survivors in a way of paying back to the society, and in a way of also rebuilding what we call forgiveness. One of the most potent things we've used in Rwanda is forgiveness. But as survivor would say sometimes is, how can you forgive if they don't ask for forgiveness? So I'll say that I'm always so humbled by the strength that survivors have, but it would be not just if I mention, within survivors, you have many categories. Obviously, you can have an orphan who now had at the age of 12 or 13 or 14 be the head of a household of their other siblings. So that's one type of survivor. Or parents that lost all their kids, that's another type of survivor. Or even worse, I think, was usually women. Because every time when you think in genocide, in war, women suffer twice because they were so, this what's called crime against humanity, which is rape, was used tremendously against Tutsi women. And it was a way of obviously giving them AIDS. It was a way of taking their dignity, and as well a way of avenging themselves of what they call in their mythic mind, which was the Tutsi woman has always been an aristocrat, living a good life. We have to show them what it is to have an atrocious killing. So to me, when I think of those different layers of survivors, I can only commend for their strength and the shoulders of giants I stand on. Some of them maybe are under the age of 30. Some of them are barely 26 because that's when the genocide against the Tutsi took place. But really, when you see us, Rwanda, the Rwanda you hear all the time being praised, it is amazing. And it would be, again, a disservice if I didn't mention, when you talk about survivors, there's also those unsung heroes. People that said, no, I remain a human. Yes, my card might say that I'm a Hutu. However, me, I've never believed in what this division wanted to cause us. And there's many, many instances of Hutus that not only protected, but either were killed for protecting or managed to not be killed, but really, really did something incredible. So to them as well, they're not necessarily survivors in the same sense as a Tutsi survivor who was hunted and wanted to be killed, but they saw what it is to put their life on the line for another life. Thank you.
Thank you both. I would say a few things that the genocide survivors, among the things that have been very important in the where they are now, or even the processes, is the need of a community, of a sense of belonging. And that has been happening. There are umbrellas of survivors of genocide, and in the schools there are they are families, and with families we have youth who survived the genocide and realized that there is no one else in their families. I'm the only person who survived in a family, as an example. And then I need a family. So some in the school started to create the families that I will take, I will be with 5 or other 6 students who also survived the genocide, and create a family. And they will function as a family and depend on each other for the everyday life. And that has been one of the probably the most successful strategies for people to feel that they have a family, which is very important in their culture. And in terms of healing, the most recent survey, which was in 2018, the National Mental Health Survey, showed that there was a high rate of mental health disorders, especially among the survivors of the genocide. And there can be a lot of ways of trying to understand what's happening. Why is that this now, 26 years or after the genocide, that they kind of actually seeing that it is not necessarily decreasing, but it's kind of, there can be lots of hypotheses to that. Was there measures before? If it is even the measures that I may not necessarily want to endorse the types of measures of the disorders, but what was being found is that the mental health disorders like PTSD, depression, there was a high rate of that among genocide survivors. And in my understanding is that there is it's probably the time for people to allow themselves to be vulnerable. They have now a safer space to feel vulnerable. If something happens to me, if I'm to run from where I am now and I hit something, I'm bleeding and I'm running and something is behind me, I will not stop to see where I'm bleeding. It's until when I get the gap of calm, I get the security, I feel safe enough to allow my feelings to get out. I feel that I have the community that are supportive of me, that I can let the emotions go out because I have that supportive community. So I think that the level of where the country is in terms of safety, or feeling that I can feel comfortable or have the braveness to allow myself to be vulnerable and express my emotions and whatever is happening, I think it is probably a step forward in terms of the healing process, and that people are allowing themselves to be vulnerable to each other and actually even expressing those unbearable emotions. And I'm also seeing a lot of grounded, community-rooted and homegrown strategies, as I named the idea of creating families that are emerging from those experiences. Again, not knowing what to do after the genocide, and sometimes taking anything that comes, like, as long as it comes from the West, it's okay. Things are kind of changing slowly, that people are starting to see, like, we need some homegrown solutions. That if someone from anywhere wants to support, they can start from where we are and help us expand and multiply what we believe it is helpful. So that's what I'm seeing in communities that I know and I worked with of genocide survivors, creating some cooperatives that will help them generate both some basic incomes to meet the basic needs like food, like housing, but also those cooperatives help them in creating communities and families and a sense of belonging. And I've seen that the people who want to help are actually going through those cooperatives to support those homegrown solutions, rather than thinking that, okay, I learned about what a genocide means and how to treat it, so I will come with my theory and my strategy. Things are changing, and the country is doing, in general, it is inspired by the country's ways of recovering, starting from what is working, the homegrown solutions, and attract support from those who want to support the country in a more dignifying way. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that. Primarily, the audience is made up of teachers and educators. And I know some of you talked about either your experience as children of refugees or asylum seekers, going to another country and then being dropped into the school system. And so for those who might have had experience in the American school system, what are some ways you can compare the Rwandan school system with the US school system? Or what is the experience of a child of Rwanda who is dropped into the American school system when it comes to how do you navigate the school system? How do you navigate documents? How do you navigate higher ed? So if you could speak to that a little bit.
Thank you. Off the top, the Rwandan education system was a Belgian European system. So it starts off there. Subsequently, since 1994, there was a shift, not so much away from that Belgian system, but rather to English. It was French, then became English. But also not discouraging French per se, but there's been Anglicized, however you want to call that, education. And because of the new immigrants or the returning Rwandans coming from all over the world to come build Rwanda, there's been injection of American, European. Some people have gone to school in China. I don't know what the education system there is. But when you look at it, it is a system that is being built to allow the Rwandans the access to any other part of the world. So basically, the bigger issue, if I understand your question correctly, Susan, is that prior to that, most of those who have come into the US, coming out of the brokenness or even the refugee camps or the countries where they had been exiled to, they may have come here with all kinds of definitely non-American education systems, whereby the challenges, one of the things I like to use is in Africa, kids go to school. And at some point they go through 1, 2, 3 grades and whatever they get to. Sometimes because of the economics there, they may drop out of school. When they resume school, they pick up where they left off. And they may be an age or two older than where they left off. But they will be allowed to continue. They will not be assigned into the upper grades that they never, and skipping what they did not study. So what that does is, when I know for a fact that there's Rwandan refugees who were now repatriated to Rwanda from the Congo and other places, who were repatriated to the United States, and children were placed into the grades by age without regard of what education they had in the camps, in the refugee camps. When you do that, you basically gloss over the gaps only to set up a child to fail. So those kinds of sensitivities, I believe, as instructors and teachers, would be wonderful if you were in a school system, be it college or elementary, where you would maybe have a way to determine, provide a level of assessment to figure out, yes, you speak English, but where did you learn your English? Is it in a refugee camp? Is it on the streets in the city of Kigali? In other words, just because they speak a language, but they have not been part of the system, does not necessarily put a 15-year-old in the 10th grade, because they may have not had the academics to prepare them for the 10th grade. They might need to go to the 8th grade. So those are things that a one-on-one touch would come in handy, because you cannot make the assumption that all 15-year-olds must be in the 10th grade, or they need to be, 17-year-olds need to be finishing. In Africa, at least when I was going to school there, we had all ages reasonable, within 2 or 3 years of difference in classrooms. It was normal. We were not all the same age. I know I had people who were 2 or 3 years older than I was, and maybe I could have been among the young ones, but it did not matter at all. We all were in the same grade. Of course, the maturity, the social maturity was different. So it might help when new immigrants come in, whether they're from Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, Uganda, it doesn't matter. Once they come to the American system, understand that they will have challenges of the system itself, the language, and the culture. So you're crossing several barriers that allow assimilation, and then be able to open up your mind to learn. So those things, and the other thing also that you'll find is the system of support at home. The mother may never have gone to school. The father may have never gone to school, or they may, but they all went in all French, no English. How then do you expect them to help their children when they come home with homework or whatever they need. And I've seen that here. I've also seen it with the Ethiopian community in the 90s, 80s. There were many in the Bay Area, Northern California, where they needed intervention because the parents who were refugees had children and they could not guide them through an American system. So we saw a lot of family conflicts where a child is basically running his own life and the parent cannot get the appropriate support for them because of the language and the system that they were completely alien to. Tusa, you can add to that. You are muted, Tusa.
So yeah, I wanted to add, simply as someone who came here to do my higher education, I'll start by saying my K through 12 was done in the French system. So it's interesting, the relationship to excellence. So I'll say that number one, I remember coming and hearing about my American friends talking about, I got straight A's, I got straight A's, I got straight A's. And I thought from my background, wow, are they all geniuses? That's impressive. Because us, you grew up with, you aim towards excellence, the 100% score. But really, to get to excellence in Rwanda, which is like that score, if you did it, like I said, you have that presidential scholarship because it's few. You aim towards excellence. Whereas in the US, one thing that I saw was that excellence is easily attainable. So two things, when you talk about the ease of access to excellence, it does kind of boost your confidence, which is good. But how strong those foundations are for you to reach all the time excellence, that's a question I leave to the educators in the audience. However, in Rwanda, you knew that you might not get all the time to that excellence. You get an 80%, 70%. I mean, I remember 70 to 80%, you're good. You're really happy. Your parents are, know that you gave your best. But it instills as well sometimes some kind of a self-doubt. You know that getting to excellence is not given to everyone. And we grew up as well in an education system where there's rankings. So you would know sometimes when there's grades out, people come and you come home and you say, your parents will ask you, so you're number what? And let's say if there's, 40 students and you come and you say, I'm number 29. Obviously you can imagine you might not have a gift for Christmas. But if you came and you're in that top 10, top 5, that was good. Top 10, top 5. So that's one thing where I remember the whole ranking system, which was very stressful, by the way, when you think, oh my God, I better make it in the top 10 because otherwise, But the interesting thing was I grew up knowing that in the French-speaking system, so in Rwanda, we emulated the Belgian system, but there's also some French schools where I went to. Oftentimes, us were amazing at writing dissertations, writing research, the pushing your mind to think critically constantly. Whereas when I came to the US, one thing I really commend my American peers for was that confidence they have. But at the same time, Rwandans, as some of you have already understood, we have 3 official languages, now 4, which is Kinyarwanda, the national language, everyone speaks it. Then Swahili, because all our neighboring countries, the region we're at, it's one of the big indigenous languages. Then English and French. So the average Rwandan speaks at least 3 languages. But when it comes to claiming that you speak all those languages, we don't do it as often because, again, that self-doubt something like, yeah, I speak 2 languages, maybe 3. But again, because you have a straight A American friend, they just speak English, took 2 years of Spanish, and they tell you, I speak Spanish. So me, I remember when I came to the US, I had to even boost my self-confidence of starting to own that, oh yeah, actually I speak 3 languages. Like, because I see my friend Connor or Todd or, whomever is in my class claiming that they went 6 months in Rwanda, now they speak Swahili, they come back, and I grew up around people speaking Swahili. I grew up around people speaking Lingala, all the different languages you can imagine in my region, and I would never dare claim. But here's a friend with a straight A, goes 6 months in Rwanda, and starts claiming I speak I speak a language. Now or so, I would say the approach of the mastery of the subject. And that to me is sometimes can be even offensive, is that I would have, once again, friends that either took a class or went for a semester abroad and come back as experts of Rwanda, experts of Southeast Asia, experts of the Latin American culture. Yet once again, even if I've studied all my life, I would always have some kind of a little self-doubt, a critique of, do I ever master this? So that's one of the things, but again, it's a good and bad, by the way, because I always commend the way my American peers are very self-confident. They can stand up in a class and almost like talk about Rwanda more than I can. Whereas I would always have some, by the way, as I'm speaking to you, this is my experience. I'm not that sure. Again, self-doubt. So I always, I think, advocate for a happy medium, a little bit of American confidence, but with a little bit of intellectual humility of my upbringing. But the one thing that I remember that some of my other Rwandan friends that went in the, because I was fortunate with my mom working for the UN, I did essentially only private schools. But some of my friends that went to the public system told me that there was a lot of just learning by heart. So putting everything in your brain and just putting it on paper. So when they came to the US, some of them was like, why is this question asking me, why do I think? Normally I was just told, say what you learned in class, put it on paper, and this is it. So some of them were challenged. Like now they're asking for my opinion. What do I think? What's my input in the books that I've read? So I know some of them were challenged by that, but the relationship as well to the teacher. Some of us will remember the teacher is, like even just to joke, when I was getting ready for that panel, I kept on referring to Dr. Susan, Dr. Acacia. And they were like, no, call us by our first names. And in my culture, when you have a title, when you're my professor or teacher, I cannot. Like so also the casual, like, oh, I have an open office, come see me anytime you want, kind of open. Us, we grew up around teacher is a highly revered person. You are the soon to be intelligent, but so far not so intelligent student. And this is it, no question asked. So that ability to question a teacher in class, that ability to raise your hand and say, teacher, what you just said, I'm not so convinced. It didn't come as natural. Like it was really, it took us to like, again, build that self-confidence of, I think my idea could be an input in the class. I think my idea could be valued by this person I revered called teacher, called doctor, called professor. So that was one of the things that was really in the transition of, but honestly, many times I got to realize that we were as gifted, if not sometimes more gifted, because we didn't have all the time, all the tools readily available compared to our American peers, yet we thrived. So to me, I think coming to the US allowed me to be more maybe orally self-confident and to be more self-confident about my mastery of a subject. But I know that in writing and the way I came with that structure of the French dissertation approach that I was taught from an early age, it allowed me to find that happy medium. But overall, the transition is always a challenge, but I'm glad that you create such platform for us to reflect on it. Thank you.
Thank you both. I think I'll just say that there is something in common. One, the prescription from the colonial way of teaching. There is this way of, there is a teacher who is there and there is a student who is there and there is the relationship from the authority to the real student. It's something I see that the education experiences in the US, in Rwanda, I see that there is that interest, at least with some schools, to move from that imperial way of educating students, of building meaningful relationships, seeing that as a good contribution to a student as a learning process, rather than feeling like that is going to be a distraction. The need for teachers to learn from students, from teachers to be students as well in their classrooms. The need for the experiential knowledge to be centered in the classrooms. The needs for allowing students to theorize from the experience and have those experiences contribute to their success in the classroom. It is the journey that I'm seeing that is happening on both sides. Above all, I think moving away from the colonial system of education to a more democratic, if it is the right word, I don't know, but a more humanizing education. I see as a journey that both in the US and in Rwanda, there is still a long way to go, but I am seeing interest. I'm seeing efforts of people seeing that the way we were educated or have been educated does not have to be the same way we educate our kids. Yeah, that's probably where I can, yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you once again for sharing. This is very inspiring. At this time, if the audience has any questions, you could type it in the Q&A or you could type it in the chat. We'll try to answer any questions that our audience has. So we're gonna open it up for questions. We do have one question that asks, is it a goal to have children return to like rebuild in Rwanda? I don't know if anyone has the expertise to answer that.
I can jump in as the youth.
Yep, go ahead, Chusa.
As the youth, I can jump in because we were fortunate to be part of, again, that civic boot camp I was telling you about, where beginning in 2008, every big school breaks. So usually it was summer and Christmas. They would gather high schoolers, those that are about to graduate, so seniors, and then so those that maybe recently graduated but are still in college, but still in that very impressionable kind of age. And they're instilling us a sense of mission. And in Kinyarwanda, we would say, guhaha ubwenge, which is go outside of Rwanda and shop intelligence. Go, learn, expose yourself, get involved. But eventually, in Kinyarwanda, we say that it's at the source that the water is warmer. So come back to where the water is warmer, which is Rwanda. So many of us in general, those that have gotten presidential scholarship, it's almost like in their contract. You go get a stellar education at Harvard, at London Business School, in Singapore, China, you name it, but then you'll come back. But even others in general is that going outside of Rwanda, get a good education. Even myself, I just got a master's last year. I'm still trying to hone my skills in the company I'm in. But eventually, I know that either if my company doesn't open an office in Rwanda or in the region to impact Rwanda, please don't tell them this, but I might have to excuse myself. Therefore, all of us usually, there's that sense of we're on a mission, we're here to better and expose ourselves to as many experiences as we can to eventually come back and build Rwanda. But as well, maybe not for everyone it is to come physically back to Rwanda, but everyone, no matter what you're doing, no matter where you are, your eyes, your interest, and your monetary investment is toward the motherland, Rwanda. Thank you.
And to add to that as well, one of the schools that is I know for sure is Carnegie Mellon University has a branch of the school in Rwanda, and a young lady that was from Rwanda who got education here, worked in Silicon Valley, went to start that school. So that's part of the giving back that everyone is encouraged, because when you go to Rwanda, you'll find that the average, I'm going to take a guess at the average minister or head of any important office within the government, they are in either their 30s, maybe their 40s, maybe. So there's a young, robust population of leaders in Rwanda who are actually running the country. And it is the desire, not only the desire to serve, to build the country, but they've gone out and acquired the necessary education and come back to provide the support that is needed. As Chusa just said, not everyone is necessarily back or eager to go back. They are, however, every day. There are those who are going in to help build, and there are those who are going out to get an education, and it's ongoing all the time and encouraged.
Thank you. Thank you. I would say that probably there is the question with with assumption that it's kind of here or there, and sometimes actually many of immigrant population, it's kind of you are between both, even when physically you are at one place. My thoughts, my heart is both in Rwanda and in the USA. And the same with what I do. It's not only just what is in my mind and the thinking, it's also practically what am I doing. Some people may think that I'm actually based in Rwanda. And this is especially from communitarian cultures as well, that people are connected in a way that there is no way to separate really much with my community, my family. There is always something happening that includes me in the communities in Rwanda. There's so many people here, what they earn, they know that they have to pay their own rent, their own food, their own bills, but they know that this percentage is doing something in the country. So there is lots of ways that people are here and there. And I know it is not unique for Rwandans. And yeah, people are contributing in different ways and in the communities that they come from. And some decided to go back physically or decided to serve the country, the community is not necessarily there physically, but it's even almost there physically. When your brain is there, there's no separation of both. It's kind of you are there. It's the only thing that is not this, that you are missing your people, even though you're still connected with them every day. Thank you.
There's a question in the Q&A, and it's what is currently being done to help the oppressed in Rwanda, and what can the audience do to aid in this effort?
That is, when you say the oppressed, I'm not so sure what that means, but I can take the back end of that question. What can the audience do? The audience can, those who are able to find organizations. There are many organizations here in the United States. I'm part of one that provides meals and supports widows and others who are not necessarily widows to children. And some of these things that were mentioned earlier, some of the victims of the genocide against the Tutsi were women that now have children from the atrocities of then, and then some of them contracted the HIV virus. So those victims can be assisted through the different nonprofit organizations that are available that help in many ways, be it providing water, clean water, be it helping them build their homes and their villages and educate their children. And also this particular organization I'm affiliated with, those women in those villages, they make crafts that are brought to the US, sold, and the money reinvested in the community. So there are many kinds of initiatives that have helped people help themselves, because the old model of just sending money to Rwanda, just hoping it falls in the right hands, did not seem to work as well in this time. So there's been much more focused NGOs, nonprofit, non-governmental organizations that have gone in to actually do actual work the way the Rwandans can participate. So we are happy to provide some of those resources for those who are interested. So the oppressed, if you mean the poor we shall always have with us, but the country is very vested in making sure that everyone in the country is cared for, is able to go to school. One of the things that they did that was kind of, it may sound too heavy-handed. However, no one was allowed to walk barefooted in Rwanda. That's not an option. It doesn't, no matter if you feel your heart, you better be carrying your shoes in your hands, but you are not going to be walking barefoot in any part of Rwanda. So it's just that they take care of that particular situation, so whereby they want to show that they can take care of their people as best they can.
Yeah, I want to ask.
If I,
I want
go ahead.
Panelists, if you guys have resources or you know of organizations, can you type that into the chat? You know of anything, just resources, organizations, I don't know, websites, even. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, so I wanted to add, just to drop the buzzword called white saviorism. When we're talking about how can we aid or help the oppressed, we always we have a word called agachiro, which is dignity. And I think, as the Chinese proverb said, of teach a person how to fish instead of feeding them a fish, I hope that when people are talking about aiding or coming to assist, quote unquote, the oppressed, I hope that it's in a partnership way, because I think when you add that partnership, it's dignifying, because it's not just me coming to help you, person that have no means of helping yourself. It's me coming to build a win-win, sustainable relationship. Because we've seen people come, build something and leave, and there's no sustainable plan. They just came for perhaps a selfie, a spiritual morale boost, and maybe to come back to a developed country and feel better about themselves and say, oh, I had a depressed life in a developed country. Now I feel better because I know that people don't drink water every day. So the one thing us as Rwandans, at least, we say is, if you come to that, or if you want to help Rwandans, you better be in a partnership, win-win, in a dignifying way. Because if it's just a stunt operation coming in and out for a white savior selfie, not in Rwanda at least. Thank you.
I would also say that, thank you, Bob. I would say that this question also comes with the understanding that there have to be an oppressed and the oppressor. That that binary is not always the case. And as probably Chusa mentioned, probably Yehoyada, about the economic or the needs that I would say the essential needs that instead of saying the oppressed and the oppressor, A and B being like separate things, I would say probably those who are most economically vulnerable that are not necessarily does not necessarily means that one is oppressed, but because the system and the history of the country made things be the way they are today. So earlier I talked about these communities putting the efforts together to build communities, a sense of belonging. That is not only to meet and talk, which is also important, but the sense of a community, but that's also helping them generate some basic incomes, that when they return home, they go back with some food, that they know that the kids are going to be able to go to school, right? There's some support for those who survived the genocide in terms of schooling. But also in general, in the community, there's that need, there's the support or the structure of the communities that they see that there is no way of healing. If I look at in my area, there's no way of healing a community, an individual when they are starving. So they kind of like, we create these healing structures, but we incorporate economic, business, some income related projects that are embedded in those community driven structures. So those cooperatives, going through those cooperative of those communities that will be called vulnerable people, if you go through them and support them in a way that is sustainable, you're not just giving them like go and eat, which is also good, but when you are actually buying from them, they have some businesses, small business. So if you can go and buy from them, you are actually supporting them in a sustainable way. You are supporting them economically, which is intertwined with the healing process. Thanks.
I think what I want to honor this time. Thank you so much, panelists, for coming and sharing very valuable information. Unfortunately, in our American system, you're not likely to learn much about Rwanda in K-12 or even at the university level unless you actually take a course. And so I feel like you guys have provided us a one-on-one course and educating the educators, and we really appreciate your time, your participation, your expertise, your professionalism, your sharing your stories. We thank you very much. At this time, we are going to close out the panel, and if people could please complete the reflection, that will help Susan and I with feedback. We'll also share some of the feedback with our panelists. And the reflection is anonymous, and so we're not targeting people for their names and who they are and where they're from. We just would like your feedback and reflection. So I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you once again. And,
thank you as well for the opportunity to come and share with your audience, and a little bit. Obviously, time can never be enough, but we are grateful and thank you for thinking of us and inviting us over to share something. I appreciate you.
Murakoze cyane. We always are grateful in Kinyarwanda. You say you've done well. Murakoze cyane. And in the Rwandan words, murakaze neza murisanga, which means all of you faithful listeners that I couldn't see, but I know you were attentively following. You two facilitators, Dr. Acacia and Dr. Susan, thank you for providing us the platform to not only elevate our voices, but to share our story. Because oftentimes this story was shared at the third person, and the honor to share it at the first person is something I don't take for granted. So really, I'm saying thank you. And in that country that I said that is slightly smaller than Maryland, called Rwanda, know that all of you listeners are excited, looking forward to one day welcome you in the country where God oftentimes come home. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to echo what my friends just said. I'm thankful for this opportunity to speak with you. And I hope that at that time there will be a time when we will also have an opportunity to hear from you, your stories as well. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.